Recording. All right. So good afternoon. Thank you all for being here. We are very lucky today to have Michelle Banonis, who is a member of the Civil and Environmental Engineering Professional Advisory Committee, which we call affectionately CEEPAC. She is a member of CEEPAC, but she is a Michigan Tech alum, and she is giving us a seminar on some work that she has had the privilege of overseeing. Michelle, I'll do a quick bio here. Michelle is a 1999 environmental engineering graduate. She is currently the Assistant Chief Deputy Director of the California Department of Water Resources in Sacramento, and she oversees the, can't do multiple things at once, oversee the largest user-funded water infrastructure project in the country and delivers water to nearly 30 million people that living in Houghton. That's a bit unfathomable. Previously, Michelle has worked for the U.S. Department of the Interior, Bureau of Reclamation, as well as the Pierce County, Washington Public Works Utilities. For those who were joining us before the hour, Michelle was talking about her service as a board member of the National Lawyers Guild, which seeks to further social justice reform. So I'm going to let Michelle now take over and share her presentation with you today.
Great, thank you. And I'll pull that up in a second. So good afternoon. It's morning here, which is why I still have my coffee. And I was telling Audra before this, as a prior director of my agency once said during a drought, because we're so reliant on winter storms here for water supply, it's another tragically beautiful day here. It's been in the 70s. That sounds lovely, I'm sure, but you know, it's a little rough actually here. We actually hope for wet, sort of rainy, snowy weather this time of year. And unfortunately, we have had very little. We had one day of rain, you know, since like, you know, last May. So it's been pretty rough. So this year is very unlike the year we had, which led to the events and the recovery that I'll be discussing. So I'm going to share with you my presentation here. Can everybody see my screen? Okay, great. All right. So again, my name is Michelle Banonis, as Audra said. I'm the Assistant Chief Deputy Director of the California Department of Water Resources. I'm going to talk about the Oroville Spillways, and that is correct, plural recovery effort. So there are two spillways. There's a main spillway and an emergency spillway at Oroville Dam. And so given the limited time today, I've decided to focus on the recovery primarily around the main spillway, but just know that spillways plural in the name indicates the recovery of both of them. So finally, I'm kind of a Jill of all trades, master of none. While I'll be talking at a high level about this effort, I would highly recommend, if anybody has any highly technical questions, engineering, statistical, you know, evaluations or anything like that, to make those comments to be made to John Yarborough, and I'll give his email at the end of this presentation. He's a great engineer. He's worked on the Oroville recovery effort for years now, and he is very, very knowledgeable on the topic and could probably answer just about anything. And finally, and while this may be a little disappointing to some of you who probably saw this on the media a few years ago, because there's still ongoing litigation around the potential causes of the actual degradation of the spillway, I won't be going into theories on what actually happened. I will be talking about, you know, what we saw after the water receded, but I will not be going into, you know, potential causes of the effort. So thanks for bearing with me on that one. I do appreciate it. So the Oroville Dam and the State Water Project in the state of California. So as Audra mentioned in the intro, we're the nation's largest state-built multi-benefit water conveyance system. What do we do for California? Well, 2/3 of the precipitation in our state is in the northern part, while 2/3 of the population is generally in the southern part. So I don't know if you can see my mouse, my cursor here, but generally this is the California Aqueduct. It goes all the way from Northern California all the way to Southern California, so we operate and maintain that. We have multiple power generation facilities, conveyance facilities, storage facilities, and at the heart of a lot of that storage is Oroville Reservoir and Dam. Water conveyance here is the foundation of California's economy. As Audra mentioned, the State Water Project supplies water to nearly 30 million people. And we irrigate roughly 750,000 acres of farmland. We also operate in conjunction with the Federal Central Valley Project, which is primarily agriculturally related. It does have some urban use. However, we primarily focus our water supply on municipal and industrial purposes. So in January and February of 2017, we had some of the wettest wettest months on record in the 110-year history of the Feather River Basin. So the Feather River is what essentially that drainage from the tributaries in the Feather provide the water supply to Oroville Dam and Reservoir. So we essentially in that watershed above Oroville received an entire year's worth of runoff. 4.4 million acre feet. So for those that work in those sort of numerics, it's a huge quantity in 50 days, 4.4 million acre feet in 50 days over 2 months. So that is unheard of. And, you know, for those who study climate science, you know, these types of events, unfortunately, are probably going to be more common in the future. The flashier flashes and, you know, the drier dries. So this was definitely a unique occurrence. So as water releases from the gated flood control spillway sort of ramped up because the reservoir was filling, and we were trying to anticipate the inflow to Oroville Dam, DWR's employees noticed sort of an unusual flow pattern in the spillway, in the main spillway. So the spillway outflow was stopped for inspection. And engineers found a large area of the concrete chute and foundation to be eroded, and it was too significant at that time to repair given the pending flood conditions. So DWR, my agency at that time, began consulting with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, so FERC, which is their dam safety program, and also the California Division of Safety of Dams, which we call the SOD here in the state, to consider the steps forward. So this is what it looked like. And of course, it started much smaller than this, but this is when we were actually able to kind of shut off the flows and do the inspection. So as the flood control spillway releases were resumed after this and ramped up, we started to notice, because we had to make releases, it was either that or potential dam failure. So people were really weighing options like, what do we do here? So they ramped up flows again down the spillway, and they started to notice significant headward, so uphill erosion. And then also started to notice some downslope erosion as well. There's a diversion pool at the base of this facility. So DWR, FERC, DSOD, all the engineers and geologists were certain this would happen, but they actually didn't know how far upslope the erosion and the damage would go. So the primary concern at that time was if the erosion got too close to Oroville Dam and the gate control structure at the base of the dam, that the spillway would have to be shut down entirely. And we didn't want that either because it creates a huge issue for the integrity of the dam structure itself. So we ramped up flows just enough to make flood space in the reservoir, and we were trying to avoid using an emergency spillway. So there is an emergency spillway on this structure. I mentioned it earlier. It's kind of, as we're facing the chute here, it's to the left. And it had never been used. Now, I won't go into why it was never used or tested, but it was constructed. It was kind of there's a concrete weir at the top, and basically just earthen structure below that. So it was never like a concrete structure that was formed as an emergency spillway just is kind of, we'll take it at face value. So this was February 10th. So thinking a lot about balancing these risks, both of which were determined to be roughly proportionate at the time. It was either spill over the emergency spillway, which it was a complete unknown for us, or severely damage the spillway structure and potentially some of the controlled outlet capabilities of the dam with higher releases. So, you know, even though we were still releasing flows down the spillway, and you can see in this picture, you know, by this point, the chute was pretty severely degraded. Some of the control walls here were worn away. There was, you know, water flowing all the way down to bedrock on this side. But even though we were making these controlled releases as much as we could, given the conditions, to try to, you know, again, maintain a safe level in the dam, we still ended up having to use the emergency spillway. So Lake Oroville's, the day after this photo was taken, Lake Oroville's level rose above 901 feet, which is the safe storage space for. And at about 8 a.m., water flowed over the lip of the concrete weir of the emergency spillway. And again, that engaged the emergency spillway for the first time in the facility's 49-year history. So erosion, while it was anticipated by engineers and geologists, and there had been a significant effort in anticipation of using that spillway, people were clearing vegetation, shotcreting, trying to do everything they could for days before. Even despite all that, erosion occurred beyond what was predicted, and the use of the emergency spillway stopped as soon as the lake level dropped to a safe degree. As a result of the use of the emergency spillway, an evacuation order for the city of Oroville and multiple downstream communities along the Feather River were issued by the Butte County Sheriff's Office. So residents did return home a few days later after increased releases from the main spillway reduced the lake level to 901 feet. So this was February 27th. So this was finally after the flows down the spillway were brought down to zero, and the lake was brought at a safe level. The inflows were at this point, so we were able to kind of area. So you can really see and hear this spillway. Hopefully you all can hear me. It says my internet connection is unstable. So anyway, okay, cool. This was the concrete weir I was telling you about, the emergency spillway. This is the main spillway. And you can see just a significant amount of scour in here. All of these concrete panels have been completely uplifted and you know, essentially pulled off. So recovery occurred in two phases. So, and this is focused on phase one of the emergency spillway recovery project. And the idea was to ensure that by November 1st of 2017, the gated flood control outlet or the main spillway could handle reservoir releases of at least 100,000 cubic feet per second before the next flood season. So if you look at, I like this slide because you can see just the extent of the work that's needed, and you can really get a feel for the time constraints in here. We're talking about just this monumental effort to try to get to a stage of, you know, feeling comfortable and confident in the public safety of the facility. So the design happened from March to June, roughly in a 4-month time frame. We mobilized in April, and construction occurred in only 5 months for this first phase. So this is pretty substantial. We did award the construction contract to Chute West. And so for folks who worked with Chute, really reputable company, and we awarded that in April of 2017. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the contract elements. But the original contract amount was for $276 million. Just for a little bit of a framing up here, I would just say that there's also a phase 2 of this effort that I'll talk about. But over only about 2 years, more than 1,000 people worked more than 2 million hours to rebuild the spillway and ensure the safety of the downstream communities. So some of the key design considerations, these pictures kind of say it all. We had a few areas with scour holes. You can see that on the left. There's a diversion pool at the base of the dam here. These are some of the baffles that had kind of been eroded as well. So this whole area needed to basically be filled in layer at a time to kind of rebuild this the spillway. And on the right, you can really see, this is kind of almost a zoom in of the area over here in the scour hole area, but there's these huge overhanging rock faces about 140 feet tall that we had to take into consideration when rebuilding the facility. Also, you know, we had to question the condition of the remaining chute. So, you know, do you save it? Do you preserve it? Do you totally blow it out of there and start again, so to speak? So these were some pretty major considerations. And then of course, just considering the overall hydraulics of the area. So this is sort of the construction sequence, and everything in here that's 2017 is phase 1 and everything that's 2018 is phase 2. This cross-section down in the lower left-hand corner, I think, is a really good representation of essentially the amount of effort that we had to undertake. So this kind of shows a cross-section of the underlying bedrock that had been worn away by the water. And essentially, we just had to go in and do layer by layer by layer of roller compacted concrete to essentially get to the main spillway chute elevation. So again, this was a huge effort, and some of these efforts overlapped on each other. So, you know, for example, this middle section, we put in RCC, but then, you know, for the next phase, we went in and actually put in structural concrete on top of that. So, so this was definitely something that had to be staged very, very carefully. So just some key design milestones in here. Again, we advertised the Spillways contract at the end of March of 2017, and we awarded the contract on April 20th of 2017. And I would just say that for anybody that works in private industry, or even anybody that's worked in the state or federal government, I think for a contract of this magnitude, that's almost unheard of. So the fact that we pulled that together so quickly was actually pretty impressive. The Scour hole slope stabilization was early May. 75% plans and specs were mid-May. Final plans and specs were the end of June, and revised plans and specs were the end of July. So I'll just go through some pictures here, and I'm going to kind of give just a verbal overview of the next series of photos, because I think they really speak for themselves. So I won't be talking too much about them, but I'm just going to give kind of a preface. So during phase 1, DWR and Chute removed and reconstructed more than 2,200 feet of the main spillway. So the section of the upper chute and the lower chute were demolished and later replaced with structural concrete slabs and walls. More than 1,000 feet of the middle chute of the main spillway was reconstructed with approximately 350,000 cubic yards of roller compacted concrete. So this is one of the sections where the large scour holes were filled in layer by roller compacted concrete. And DWR also patched and added additional anchoring to the uppermost 730 feet of the main spillway leading to the radial gates. Now that was in phase 2. But I still think it's important to note here because we're kind of looking at different sections that got replaced over the 2-year period. So this picture, I think, speaks volumes. So this is the upper scour hole. This is the picture we were just looking at, but from a different perspective. You can actually see people down here, and you can really just get a sort of a visual aspect of just the magnitude of what we were dealing with. So this is also the upper scour hole. So this just kind of shows over time, you know, you can really see in August, September, just layering in that roller compacted concrete layer by layer by layer by layer, essentially getting to like this nice smooth chute on November 1st. So pretty significant in a very, very short period of time. We did have obviously, maybe this goes without saying, we did have several batch plants on site as well. So the lower scour hole, I have a few slides on this one, but we'll go through them pretty quickly. But you can just kind of see this is May. Again, we're starting to stabilize, starting to fill in. This is August. And you can really just see that things here are you know, getting filled in by the roller compacted concrete. And then finally, all the way up until August, when we've got a pretty nice, smooth, more or less even chute here. And, you know, you can see the guys working around these huge scour holes, just, you know, again, layering it in bit by bit, pretty impressive. And then the upper chute construction. So this is, basically this was kind of cool because I was actually out here for some of this, and they had put some explosives in here to actually blow out a lot of this concrete. So that was pretty interesting. But so they did that, and then they kind of brought in some, you know, jackhammers and sort of knocked out a bunch of this concrete from the original construction of the chute, cleaned it all up, and basically went ahead and, you know, added in the rest of the concrete layer by layer. And again, just another visual perspective, this is the lower chute. These are the baffles I was referring to. So all of this got all reconstructed. All these baffles got replaced. Just kind of gives you, again, another perspective. And then this is just a great picture because it just shows everything going on at once. And you can really get just a feel for the size of the effort, all the people on site, everything happening. Like I said, I think, you know, Chute did a great job of staging and you know, figuring out how everything was going to fit together with us. So this was pretty incredible effort. And this is, again, I mentioned that this is Spillways. So this is the concrete weir. This is the emergency spillway over here. So there was work being done on this as well. Like I mentioned, I wasn't going to go into that a lot today. I would say it's mostly, there was a secant wall put in here, and again, some additional concrete work done back here as well. And this is just an overview of the overall spillway between May and November 1st. And you can just really get an appreciation for the amount of, you know, demo work and reconstruction work that, you know, really got us to meet, you know, the next flood season. Okay, so phase two, as I mentioned, we're not going to go into the emergency spillway portion of this today, but there was also roller compacted concrete splash pad that was also put in there, and it was really intended to armor the terrain and reduce uphill erosion. But phase two of the project began in May 2018 on the main spillway. So these are the walls, like right by the radial gates on the dam. So the uppermost 730 feet was removed and reconstructed with steel reinforced structural concrete slabs and walls. So the chute was basically brought to a final design by adding a 2.5-foot layer of structural concrete, as well as replacing the roller compacted concrete walls with structural concrete walls. So, you know, understanding that 2017, we had to do some things that we knew we were going to have to remove because we were trying to be as safe as possible and as quick as possible. So this is just another overview. The radial gates are at the bottom of the screen, and that's kind of overlooking the chute going down. So this is just after everybody kind of pulled all the existing concrete slabs out. And you can kind of get a view here of everybody pouring concrete all at once, putting in the reinforced steel. I think this picture speaks volumes. And then just, as we were nearing up on November 1st, I think, these are just kind of the final moments, people working around the clock to beat the deadline. And then, on April 2nd, we ended up using this in 2018, and we ended up using the spillway for the first time. And the good news is it worked beautifully. It worked exactly as anticipated. There was a lot of scrutiny around it, of course, just because people were concerned, but, it came out perfectly. There were a lot of eyes on it, a lot of analysis, and it worked very, very well. I would just say, for those who are wondering what the overall price tag was, we're looking at roughly $1.1 billion for this effort for both phase 1 and 2. And then you may also ask, where does that money come from? Well, so initially, we are, as I mentioned, a user-funded entity. So I think in a normal set of circumstances where this is not an emergency, we probably, it would have come out in the rates of wheeling water to municipalities, which, attenuates because, again, we serve millions of people. But we did, petition FEMA a few times to get reimbursement, and FEMA did agree in February of this past year to reimburse the $1.1 billion. They did consider it to be an emergency, and there was a lot of back and forth there, and I actually was not involved in all of that. I just know that there was FEMA rejected and then they approved, so it kind of went back and forth. So moving forward, what do we do? What does this look like, right? What do we learn from this? Because this is a huge deal. It wasn't just living in the moment. It's thinking about, our water infrastructure into the future. So I think, we really learned a lot about improving our capabilities and partnerships with stakeholders and agencies. Our Division of Safety of Dams in the state is intending to modify its dam safety and inspection reevaluation protocols based on recommendations from an independent technical advisory panel. So the panel's primary recommendation was a DSOD develop and implement an integrated risk-informed decision making into its dam safety program for large state regulatory programs. And really the idea was that this risk-informed decision-making is going to improve the resiliency of dams by systematically identifying dams that pose the greatest risk to the public. Now, I would just say that Oroville, even despite all of this, was still not in a category of dam that would pose the greatest risk to the public. And it's based on a series of criteria that is beyond my level, that I don't typically work with. Again, our engineer would know more about that, but I would just say that Oroville is not in that category. Finally, climate change adaptation, I mentioned earlier, the wet months are flashier, in a lot of these systems, not so much the Feather, but you've probably heard of Shasta Reservoir, which is, nearly a 5 million acre reservoir that's managed by the federal government. They rely a lot on snowpack in those regions. And so we have less snowpack now with warming temperatures. And so how do we manage that? And what does that look like? And we can't rely on, just the water supply given to us by melting snow over time. And we also can't rely on the temperature reduction that also results, from those melting snow conditions, because those are also really important to fish downstream and the health of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Bay Delta, which is a very, very large tidal estuary on the West Coast. So dry times are also prolonged and hotter. So what does that mean for us? How do we holistically manage water infrastructure to account for all these dramatic climatic changes? So this is something we grapple with constantly. We currently have something called, Governor Newsom put it out earlier this year. It's called the Water Resilience Portfolio. And really the idea is that for our state, we're looking at a multitude of different things that encompass ecosystem restoration, integrated water management, flood control, aging infrastructure. It's basically a very broad portfolio approach to trying to kind of put all your ducks in a row for making decisions related to water supply in the future. Asset management, aging infrastructure, like I said, what do we do about it? How do we protect public health and safety and build trust? This is a big issue in California, especially. We have almost all of our dams in the state are over 50 years old. Some are closer to 100 years old. So what do you do about that? And what does it look like? And are we doing the best we can do? Can we do better? Where does the money come from to maintain and operate these facilities? These are huge questions that I don't have a silver bullet on. I wish I did. And then, like I said, just building better relationships and, engaging the local community. And so I'm going to play a video, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen on a different screen here. And we're going to watch a quick video. It's a 5-minute video, but it's really cool. It's a time lapse and kind of gives you some engineering statistics related to the Oroville recovery efforts. So go ahead and watch that. Oh, sorry. All right. So for those of you asking if there was sound, there was just music, so you didn't miss much. It's all good. Oops, and it's still playing in the background. All right, we'll stop that. Sorry about that. All right, so I'll go back to my screen just really quickly here. And for those of you who are interested, that video is available on DWR's YouTube channel. And so I just want to say thanks. I'm done. This was me. I was pretty excited to be out there a couple times, and I actually got to do like a really great like helicopter flyover with the Butte County Sheriff all the way from, you know, the Upper Feather. This is probably about in the May timeframe, so a little bit after the Spillways incident. I actually was not with DWR, just for folks who are curious. I did not come on to DWR until like about a month and a half, 2 months after the main spillway emergency occurred. So, I was not there during the decision-making processes originally, but I did get to see a lot of the recovery effort, and so that was really, really, really cool. So, and for those who want more detail, like I said, any engineering or technical information, John Yarbrough's the guy. He knows everything about everything related to Oroville. If you want more information on just DWR at large, this is only one, believe it or not, one small fraction of what we do. The State Water Project's a big piece of it, but we do flood control, ecosystem restoration, pretty much run the gambit here in the state. And then for anybody who has additional questions, my contact information is also here. So any questions or comments, happy to take them.
Go ahead, Stan. I know you're waiting.
Oh, come on. Someone else asked a question.
No one loves dams like you, Stan.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll ask my unfair first one. So I'm Stan Baton. I don't know if I remember you or not, but I'm a geotechnical engineering professor. But anyway, I'm sort of got stuck onto the our state dam task force. As you may know or may not know, we had a Edenville dam failure, and it was a FERC regulated dam, and there was a lot of issues involved in as to why. We're not going to get into them, but the question, one of the questions that are really, really burning to ask is, in the state of Michigan, the state does not regulate any FERC dams. Some states do, some states don't. California does. So basically in California, you had two agencies overseeing the safety of that dam, correct?
That is correct, yeah. Yeah, the California Division of Safety of Dams also was involved, yes, that's correct.
Okay. So,
and they only come in jurisdictionally when a dam is over a certain height, but yeah, they are there.
Feet sort of thing. Yeah, I think it's 50 feet in California, right? I think.
Pardon me, I missed that part.
Well, I think 50 feet is the rule in California, but anyway.
I actually want to say it might be a little bit less than that, but it's hard to say because the project I was thinking of, I was in an area of like massive groundwater based land subsidence, so you know, so it's hard for me to gauge.
So this is the unfair question. Does the state of Michigan is wrestling with the issue of does the state also look at regulating FERC regulated dams, or should we just let FERC handle FERC dams? You know, some states do, some states don't. Most states do not, I think, is what we heard from FERC, but certain states like California, Colorado, some others do. Can I fairly ask what your opinion might be on that?
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, the trick, and you know, the stand with FERC is they really only come in when there's like a power generation element. So if, you know, you're in a state like ours where that may or may not be part of the equation, then, you know, FERC doesn't necessarily come in. So we've got, for example, some dams that are water supply dams that, you know, are smaller. They fit DSOD's regs, but potentially not FERC's regs. And so, here in our state, just I would say as our primary example, I think it's a good check and balance system to have also an additional level of state regulation for those dams that normally would not be under FERC jurisdiction.
So this dam.
I can only speak to my personal experience, but
so this dam, this was a hydro.
It is.
So it was regulated by FERC.
It was regulated by FERC. Yeah, we have a Hyatt power plant on this particular dam. There's actually a couple power generation areas on Oroville. We also have one in Thermalito Afterbay. So there's also an Afterbay as part of the overall Oroville complex. I would just say too, the other thing I didn't go into in this presentation, but when the Oroville emergency was happening, there was also substantial flood fighting efforts happening at Hyatt Power Plant because they're kind of right in the midst of where the water was going, and so it was and the water was rising in the river, which probably would have happened with or without the dam emergency regardless, but yeah, I know that's a different thing, that's an aside, but also worth noting.
So one more question, but I mean for this is a high risk dam. I mean this thing was not your mom and pop dam. So it was regulated under FERC's regulations, and it also had inspections every 2 years, and they're pretty intense. So I can see where the litigation is, but who's going to sue who?
Yeah, I probably won't go into that, but yeah, I would just say that there were to the best of my knowledge, the inspections were occurring as prescribed by the overseeing regulatory agencies. So,
and those are the two.
And again, that's why it becomes, the question of is that enough? Is that correct? Does it need to be updated? Obviously DSOD, I think here in the state is taking another look at, how things get regulated.
So why are there any suits if FEMA is going to pay for it? All right, I'll end my questions. Someone else has a question. I have a whole list here, folks, so.
I have a question for you, Michelle.
Sure.
And so you're having quite an accomplished career, and I'm just interested if you could tell us about your path, including getting a law degree, and if you have advice for the students or for us as faculty that we can be giving students about how to look at your career path.
Sure. So, so my career started when I left Michigan Tech. I actually moved to the Seattle-Tacoma area of Washington, and I started my career as just an extra hire with a public works agency, and then I ended up as sort of an engineering technician. And even though my degree was in environmental engineering, I actually started part of my career doing roadway design and a lot of AutoCAD work, which I know civil engineers love, and I'm sure some environmental engineers love. I would just say it's probably not my cup of tea, but that's okay. Everybody's different. I did learn a lot from that, and then I kind of just got more engaged in sort of the biology aspect of things. And so I sort of shifted career paths, and I was very fortunate in the agency I was in because I actually was able to become an environmental biologist there. And I did a lot of wetland and stream restoration work. And ironically, because I had that CAD work, I could actually come up with my own stream and restoration designs and plans and specs. And so I was one of the only people that could just do that on my own, which, it was really kind of cool to be able to do that and not have to rely on anybody. I could just magically do this. So it was fun. And then I got more into the regulatory side of things. And so started working on, water quality permits, Corps of Engineers permits for earthwork and, just your typical 401 and 404 water quality certification type processes, Endangered Species Act stuff. You know, in the state of Washington, they also had, you know, State Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, all that good stuff. So did a lot of compliance. And then I moved to Sacramento and kind of went back into restoration work. I ended up working for the San Joaquin River Restoration Program, which was an effort that was actually implemented through Congress based on 18 years of litigation related to the San Joaquin River and Bryant Dam needing to keep fish in that river in good condition based on the state Fish and Wildlife or Fish and Game Code. So I came into that role, kind of again started in sort of regulatory compliance, and then I actually shifted quite a bit more towards like salmonid and fisheries management type of things, not necessarily hatchery management, but just, you know, more related to conditions in stream, trucking and hauling fish, you know, things like that, establishing a conservation hatchery on the river. And then I ended up going over to California Water Fix Project, formerly known as the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, which many of you may have heard about. Super contentious, was around for a lot of years, still being kicked around in some capacity, except now it's a single tunnel conveyance option, a little bit different, but that project essentially was seeking to add a new point of diversion on the Sacramento River to divert into San Luis Reservoir, which is south of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, basically underground. And originally it kind of started off as more of a conservation plan effort for anybody who's worked on habitat conservation plans under ESA. It's usually a whole host of things intended to benefit the health of the ecosystem. Takes some time to work through, usually with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and National Marine Fisheries Service. So worked on that for a while, and then ended up being the head of the Bay Delta office with Reclamation. And that was overseeing a lot of the science and data management, as well as restoration projects in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. And then I was also the assistant to the regional director for reclamation for a while. And then came in and got appointed. I'm technically appointed by the governor in my current role with the Department of Water Resources. So this role, I'm technically third in charge of the agency. We have about 3,700 people over the state. It's a very, very large agency. And I work mostly in policy, but I mentioned I'm a Jill of all trades, master of none. And I think what that essentially means is that I can kind of drop in anywhere, anytime on minimal notice and, you know, kind of try to manage through some of these more complicated projects. So I've worked on here voluntary agreements, which are related to our Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan update process. And so the idea is that from a very holistic watershed management perspective, these voluntary agreements are intended to provide more outflow to the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta for the health of the fishery, as well as a whole host of billions of dollars worth of habitat restoration on the tributaries and in Delta. So I did work on that. I also worked more recently on our incidental take permit for the State Water Project, which was one of the more controversial things I've worked on in my career. Another issue we're being litigated on, but that's kind of typical when you're in a large state agency. And then more recently, I've been working on how to facilitate water transfers for the benefit of the ecosystem and also for drought contingency. So I would say my number one advice to everybody would be to be as flexible as you possibly can be. Stay open-minded, because even some things that I've come into that I thought I would not like when I initially started, I ended up absolutely loving and really getting into it. I'd also say that, you know, keep your eye on policy, and maybe that goes without saying, but even when I was in more technical elements of my career, I always found that keeping an eye on sort of the ebb and the flow of politics and policy always kind of helped me just kind of frame up things more from an umbrella perspective and kind of understanding how everything integrates together. I've worked with a lot of folks that, they're very sort of focused and in their lane narrowly. And I think there's a time and a place for that. I would also say, at least for my career path, it's been really good to kind of understand like how that one piece fits with all the other pieces, and understanding it's just part of the puzzle. Sorry, that was longer than it needed to be.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, I hear one.
After the big spillway event, was there any, I guess, like environmental surveys or restoration done downstream with all the junk that got washed downstream?
Yeah, so because of sedimentation, there were quite a few efforts that occurred. I think first and foremost, there were recovery efforts to remove, I believe it was fall run Chinook out of the river that were rearing there. So there were Department of Fish and Wildlife, or State Department of Fish and Wildlife, DWR, I think there were a couple other entities in there, undertook pretty significant efforts to be able to get those fish and get them out of kind of harm's way in the river. Of course, when the river was safe, because, we were also dealing with flood stage. So they were able to do that. And then there were also efforts to get in and remove a substantial amount of the sediment also. So that, it was a little tricky because, we were working under an emergency proclamation in the beginning. So, frankly, at the beginning of that, your main concern is health and human safety for the public. So, our first goal was to, eliminate the harm or the potential harm to any of the public. So once we did that, then we were able to, focus our efforts more on the ecosystem health. So, and there have been, post surveys and things like that after the fact as well, and documentation of any effects to species. And we have been working really closely with National Marine Fisheries Service as well, related to these efforts, and Fish and Wildlife Service, because they actually help manage a lot of the hatchery runs in these areas. So I'd say the aquatic impacts were the primary concern, of course. So. And we also had to do emergency Endangered Species Act consultation, which is also kind of par for the course in something like this. So, yeah.
Other questions?
I have one.
Hey, Dave.
Thanks, Michelle. Can we schedule 20 more seminars with you?
I would love to bring in John and just have him give you all the technical details. I'm sure that would.
Well, yeah, my question might be for him, but I'm curious about the risk-informed decision making. And as you said, this was an extreme event that could not have been foreseen based on historical data. But in response to this, and maybe recognition of aging infrastructure and climate change, are reservoir operations changing in California to be a little more risk averse, perhaps, to these extreme events?
Yeah, we've had a lot of collaboration related to risk-informed decision-making with safety of dams, with the Corps of Engineers, with our state and federal partners. I've actually been involved in a couple of the seminars, really just kind of drilling down on, do we create more headspace in some of these reservoirs? Oroville is one where we've, certainly talked about, and I think we've actually, I don't want to speak to it because I don't know the actual specifics, but I do know that our key operators have actually adjusted, for example, Oroville operations specifically, not just in response to this, but just in response to overall climate change adaptation. So this is something that's actively being engaged on. We're coordinating it across the board with our partners at the Bureau of Reclamation, the federal entity as well, because obviously it takes a village. And, if we are, just making changes on the Feather River, but, the main stem Sacramento River and other reservoirs aren't in kind also, making similar changes, then, we coordinate. So I would just say that we've always been highly coordinated among the projects regardless, just because it's such a dynamic system. So, if more releases are coming from Shasta, other folks will back off and vice versa. But this has just, I think, made us be even more aware of how acutely in tune we need to be and how forward thinking we need to be. So I know that these are ongoing discussions, and I know that the Corps has also updated some of their criteria as well. So I think, it's been a slower process, but I think, we're starting to make some pretty sound changes now. So, and, let's just hope that our climate change models are, the best we can get. So, yeah. And we've also got the whole dynamic here of potential rising sea level too. So into the Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta. So that's also its whole host of issues and salinity intrusion and a whole bunch of other things that all affect how we manage reservoirs. If it was just fresh water, I think it would be an easier dynamic, but there's a lot going on.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks.
All right, we are at the top of the hour. I don't know if Michelle has a few more minutes in case anyone has other questions, but I would like to have us all thank Michelle. You could use the with the reaction icon and give her a big clap so that she knows we appreciate her and her time and sharing this with us. It's I marvel at the scale, and I had a question very similar to Robin, just thinking about the mass of the debris and the impact it had to have had on the surrounding environment. So I just really still can't quite grapple with, just how big that is. That's a lot.
Yeah, and the really interesting thing about our system too. Don't worry, I've got dogs barking in the background right now too, so feel ya. All right, so but I would just say that it's interesting because I think Oroville's the tallest earthen dam in the United States, but I would also say that we have other reservoirs in our backyard that are bigger than Oroville and older than Oroville. And so again, it's, really just trying to, I think, manage for these aging infrastructure components. And the sediment, I think the other thing to mention there is even in absence of the emergency, there probably would have been pretty substantial sedimentation regardless, just because of the overall hydraulic conditions and the amount of water that would have been coming down the system would have created a pretty significant scour on the Feather River itself too. So there's kind of also that component that, regardless of the dam incident, there still would have been quite a bit of that occurring as well. So yeah, it's tough times. Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you, Michelle. We really appreciate it. It was good to see you. I hope you have a good rest of your day and some not so lovely weather.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Wish for rain. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
All right.
Michelle.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.